Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Doris MANGRUM, your host, and this is Stop the Madness, Practical Ways to Influence the Incarceration Crisis, a series of education in our community. If you are a regular viewer, you know that over the last few shows we have been covering a topic called Check the Reality, where I, along with my guest, LORA, SALL, have been looking at some of the realities that exist in the incarceration crisis, and then we've begun to check them and say why they're not good. And today we're going to wrap up this series, and thank you again for being with me today, LORA. I appreciate your having sat in with me on these shows. I think it's been an exhilarating conversation. But I think what we're going to do today is we're going to wrap this series up and begin to look at not only checking the reality, but asking the question of where do we go from here? We started everywhere from we started from the beginning, the 2+ million of folks that are behind the walls, the impact that it has on children, families, and communities, the prison escalation of building and construction, the political ramifications, and all of those things we checked. But now, after we checked them, it's time for us to take a look at, now what are we going to do about them in terms of where do we go from here? And I think a good place maybe for us to start is to look at, let's just go back to 1994, and that's one of the points of beginning, and it's not the very point of beginning, but where we had this crime bill and the beginning of that 30-some-odd billion of dollars that were placed into the atmosphere for prison construction. And so we know with that, over 1,500 prisons were built in 1995. And 39% of those went into the rural areas to pump up what's going on in terms of their political clout, the numbers and voting and all of those kinds of things. So now let's take a look then at what we can do and where we can go from here as it pertains to that one item, and then we'll move into others from there. So the ramifications of the 1994 bill, and how do we move away from that? I think we've already done some good starting on it, if you will, in terms of, trying to reverse some of the things that we're doing in terms of the numbers of people that we're letting out and shifting from felonies to misdemeanors and early releases, et cetera, et cetera. But what is your take on where we go from there?
Imagine had we taken some of that money and put it into rebuilding our schools, rebuilding our universities, rebuilding programs that would allow people to go to school for less, and paying teachers. And so we can look at all of that that's been going on, and privatizing prisons and allowing others to get involved in building and incarcerating people. And I think what we need to do is look at how it has not worked. We can look at all that was put into creating this environment, but it hasn't worked.
Absolutely.
And so now what they're trying to do is change it so that it would help people get out, help people get back to the reality of what that incarceration, building more prisons and putting people in prisons has done to us as a society. And so one of the things we want to do is look at that, look at where we are, look at how many more people were put into prisons because we had more and we had to house people. Mm-hmm. And how has it worked? It hasn't.
One of the things that you say, absolutely hasn't. That's why we're talking about practical ways to influence this whole thing. But one of the things you hit on in your response was the cost factor. Mm-hmm. I'm sure most people have heard, but it costs around $30,000 plus to house one incarcerated individual annually. Now, so where do we go from here? In my perspective, as we begin to talk about these kinds of things, is think about what we could do with that $30,000 that it takes for us to put someone who had just a little bit too much marijuana back behind the walls for however many years. But 1 year, that 1 year of money, and we catch on the front end of placing this individual, him or her, into a job. That we begin to look at those monies that have been taken to house someone and to contain them and control them and to shift their life in such a way that they are now able to move it forward, as opposed to wasting, if you will, the money on trying to contain and control. So I think a very good place for us to look at going is to look at taking the monies that are being spent annually to contain and control, to take it and change it around to educate and to employ. So that just kind of goes along the lines with what you had just shared.
Now, two things. 30,000
plus
back in 90.
Well, I don't know if it was back in the 90s.
Because now they're talking upwards of 60,000 annually to house one person.
Oh my goodness, okay.
And when you look at the other day I was looking at the meals, the magnitude in a minimal security facility, just looking at 3 square meals a day, medical services, dental services. I met a woman who does haircuts. And these are all regular services, having a bed, having clothes, having to keep certain things clean, okay, and having to have regular shots because they're going to be housed amongst a variety of people coming from a number of areas. Now, if you just look at those basic needs, separate from any programs and other services you're trying to give to someone to get them out, if they provided those kinds of dollars for people prior to getting them into these facilities, imagine how much further they can go. Now, I talked to a gentleman not long ago who has been incarcerated all his life. His mother put him out the house at 9 years old, and now he's 32. And he's been in and out of prison and jail so many times that that has become his reality more so than anything else. Yeah. However, what he's done is learned how to be a contractor, do building and construction, and he has made himself a point person for hiring people coming out of prison or coming out of jail so that they can work in construction or in any of the trades needed to work on private homes as well as the companies that would hire him to build their businesses. And so what he's determined to do is hire people. So my question to him was, have you ever found yourself in a position where you really regretted hiring someone? He said, never regretted hiring. He said, but I'd have no problem firing, because every time I have to fire someone, that's another position that's available for somebody else. Ready. He said, it hasn't turned me off to hiring people because I have a number of people whose lives have changed as a result of my being able to hire them. And they're still working hard to this day after years of working with us.
You know, one of the things you talked about too is putting it on the front end. And if we look more to preventative, you know, we have this little slogan now, I guess you would call it catchphrase, pipeline to prison. Well, how about a mindset shift, pipeline to prosperity? And then we already know what kinds of monies are going to be spent. We've established that it does not work. So if we already know it does not work, these monies are being spent anyway, why don't we put it on the front end and make it work? Pipeline to prosperity could look something like, for men and women coming out of high school who may be in underserved communities, that we already have these kinds of monies waiting for you to help you get on with your life. $60,000 per individual annually to move them into jobs that are going to move them into a place where they can be successful not only for themselves individually, but for their children, for their families, and rebuilding our communities. That's a mindset shift that society is going to need to make in order for it to happen. Right now, it's a lofty conversation between Laura and Doris, but the reality is that it can happen, and it's happening in small segments in many places all across the country. But in order for it to come together as a global kind of thing, it's going to take a shift in pipeline to prison to shift to pipeline to prosperity. Instead of spending this money on the backside where we have people coming out who are not being rehabilitated, who are not getting the corrections that's put on the building, but are being controlled and contained instead. And we have people coming back to us who are not ready to translate back into our community. If we shift our mindset, instead of pipeline to prison, but pipeline to prosperity, put it on the front end. Already know that these are underserved communities for various reasons because of policies and systems that have been in place. And put on that front end, let's help folks to move forward positively. Those who don't have those finances, who didn't come from a family of wealth, who can just pass it down and automatically. So let's pass it down America, because in the end, America is who is going to benefit from that shift in the mindset. Absolutely. So that'd be a great place for us to start. Yes. Let's look a little bit at where could we go from here as it pertains to our children. I think we hit on it just a little bit in that response as I just was sharing. As we begin to look at mom, dad, and the folks who are responsible, it's going to impact the babies. But in terms of, we know the collateral impact. The collateral impact is particularly if it's a mom that's gone, the child may lose their primary caregiver, maybe have to change schools, they are going to have to get new friends. All of these things that impact that baby's self-esteem and feeling good about them, the teasing, the name calling, all those kinds of things that they are impacted by. So how can we say, or where do we go from here as it pertains to the children, and what's next as we look forward beyond checking the reality on this crisis?
Well, I think touching on what you just talked about, when you talk about prosperity, I think we need to start that very young, in elementary school, talking to children about what it means to be prosperous, not just financially, but what it means to feel really good and accomplished within yourselves, so that when they get older, as they're growing, they're not comfortable in a prison environment. They're not comfortable following the footsteps of their parents, their father, their mother, their cousins, their uncles and aunts and other people that they've seen go into prison. And go visit if they're lucky. They don't see that as being the norm. They see that as being the exception. And so if in elementary school you start talking to them about being prosperous, start teaching them about money, start teaching them about education, start teaching them about growth and feeling good about who they are, then that other environment isn't their norm anymore. Following an environment or following a direction that helps them feel good about themselves will become their norm.
So we're shifting not only the money, but we're shifting the mindset. And that can start on a one-by-one basis. We don't have to wait for big money to come. I think one of the things that I have heard recently that really resounded with me was that we don't have to wait for big things for something to be changed. It's oftentimes we want to say, well, that's not really going to be but a drop in the bucket. Well, we need to start doing some of these drops in the bucket, these small things that ultimately will lead to a big thing. Or because when we wait for the money, we typically just wait. Well, we're going to do this when we get the money. No, we can do these things now. I'll share with you something that comes to mind readily for me that happened with me. I do a lot of talking across the country, and I have an opportunity to have worked with some correctional facilities, lawmakers and that kind of thing around ways that we can shift things. And so I just throw out little ideas about this is something you can go do as soon as this conference is over. And one of those things that was done, I had suggested that one of the ways that we're not connecting is with the families who are coming to visit. You know, these are our partners. These are folks who want to see their loved one do better. They're spending their time, their money, their effort to come out here on a regular basis to keep their loved one connected. We need to make sure that we're valuing that and then not treating people like they have also committed crime as well. So one of the things I suggested, and this is probably dated at this point because of the technology that we have, was that they put in a telephone line, a simple telephone line that was activated for 24 hours a day that told about shifts in the facility. If there was a lockdown, if there was a change of visiting times or dates or policy, that families would know. And that one single thing that's not going to cost you probably $10 a month could literally change the relationship between families that are coming to visit and the prison to which they're coming. I got a note probably about 3 days later that they had put that phone line in and that the families were just applauding them, and they thanked me so much. That's simple. There are a myriad of things that are like that are tiny things that can move us towards prison to prosperity, to shifting the mindset, the moratorium on the old way, understanding that we've made some mistakes. And so I just encourage our viewers to begin to think that way, to begin to look at what we can do that is little. And little by little, your folks will join you and people will want to be a part of it. So let's shift now to, as we've talked a little bit about the children and we've looked at the prison construction and we've looked at, you know, shifting the money back. How do we now look at the community, the folks, the society, we're talking about where do we go from here? And we've talked about some specifics, but then there's some things that the viewers who are the community at large and the people that they connect to are the community at large. So what can the community do? Where does it go from here? And talk about mindset, but beyond mindset.
There's a quote that says, the most powerful tool in the minds of the oppressor are the minds of the oppressed. And until our community starts seeing each other and seeing that we are connected and we are valuable, it's hard to think in terms of seeing that incarcerated family member or community member as being valuable as well. So we have to start taking the time to seeing ourselves as valuable, seeing who we are as a people. We are great. And seeing who we are connected to each other and how our connection helps us all move forward. And so that person that's incarcerated is none other than our family member that we need to welcome back to the community and welcome them with open arms, because that's another person with some history and some life skills that will help us continue to move forward so that they don't have to keep going back. If we embrace them and start embracing one another in a way where we see our community as that value versus that in building that jail, that prison as being that valuable place. Because oftentimes when men and women find themselves in and out of prison, it's because that's who they feel connected to. That's where they have started feeling connections.
Yes.
And they know when they get back there, they're going to run into Joe over here and Sister so-and-so over there, and that's become their family.
Absolutely.
Because they know coming out, they are going to be shunned, they're going to be looked down upon, they're going to be frowned upon because of whatever activity they were involved in. Assumptions are being made about them, and so we want to make sure that they understand that you're still my brother.
Exactly.
And we are each other's brother or sister's keeper. And so we have to start coming back together as a community, as a family, and helping all of us grow, whether we're inside or out. Because that prison out there is just as bad as the prison in our minds.
Of the mind, absolutely.
And so we have to start reprogramming our subconscious and reprogramming who we see each other as.
You know, it's so amazing the things that you're saying because, you know, particularly the people of color who have been most highly impacted by this crisis because of the policies and systems that were put into place. I think I'm hearing in your response that we have to take a look and step back at what we bought into. Because, you know, while we say, oh yes, it's sure they've hurt us, they hurt our people, da 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 da, but we bought into some of it. Well, yeah, they just throw away, they ain't gonna do nothing but go right back out there. But why? Or is it they ain't gonna do nothing but go back out there? It's because of some of the things that you just cited. Because we have, in our mind's eye, not really looked at the full picture. You know, we've looked at the going back over and over again, but we haven't really digested. We say it, we say, oh, there's no jobs, no housing, no this. But that's words, unless we begin to really internalize it and then understand where do we go from here by embracing. You know, our faith-based communities are really, I just want to hold them accountable. I mean, I know that there are many that are doing a lot of great work, but there's nowhere near enough. And then as I'm shifting in what I'm responding, as we shift then to now looking at faith-based, I think one of the things I see that I'd like to see us, where do we go from here, would be more of collective work among our faith-based organizations and not just denominational connections, you know, interdenominational, ecumenical, you know, whatever the big word is that includes everybody that considers themselves a person or organizations of faith. You know, it's about helping and doing things that are going to support people moving on with their lives. Well, let's put it together. You know, we talked about the little things that we can do. Well, one of the little things that we can do is all these folks that have got these great organizations come together. Look at what you're doing, what I'm doing, what we're doing, and see, okay, this is what's happening collectively. Where are the gaps? Where are the gaps in the services that we're providing? Well, then Church A and Congregation B could then fill the gap there. So coming together in the same way that you just talked about for society to do, could be included in that big umbrella for our faith-based organizations as well.
But the other thing we have to do as well is start listening to what the people in the community are saying.
Yes.
Because there's reasons why the people living next door to your church are not attending your church. There's a reason for that. And there's a reason why so many of our churches are overloaded with women, but the men are staying home. There's a reason for that. And so we have to start looking at not only coming together with the different denominations, but start coming together with the people who live right in that same community that your church is located in.
And I hear this time and time again when visiting many churches. So many are aware of the fact that we've got to get outside of the walls. That church, you know, while the word, I'm not going to get deep into that, but the word says that it's good for us to assemble together, to come together and do what we do on Sunday morning, Saturday morning, whenever it is your day of worship may be. But it's more important that we do take the church to the community. So that question that you asked about, you know, why is that person next door don't even know that there really is a church next door, and those kinds of things then come back to centering us around, you know, where do we go from here? So coming together as community, recognizing the need for, you know, programming, understanding that the money could be better spent, putting a moratorium obviously on the prison construction, looking at these private prisons and say, whoa, wait a minute, let's look at this. Taking a look at the political nuances that have occurred around the crisis and bringing them back to a reality that works.
And welcoming people back home.
All of that, yes.
Welcome them back home, embrace them, and move forward. You can't change your history.
That's it.
But you're not stuck right there in that history. And so continue to move forward, continue to look at ways you can change that history and change how we welcome people.
Learn from it.
Exactly.
Learn from it. Otherwise, what's that is the phrase that says, if you don't learn from history, you tend to repeat it. That's not exactly how it goes, but that's the gist of it. And so for us now, we're in a place right now where we are shifting. We see at the federal level, you know, where they're beginning to now, you know, rethink and look at an early release and all those kinds of things. But that's at the federal level. At the state level, we've got to start looking state by state at the things that can be changed. And some states are ahead of the curve in terms of understanding that this has not worked. This mass incarceration has not worked. This tough on crime has not worked.
Yes.
So we're now at that place where we are back. We are at, when I say back, we're at that place where we are looking at it at a frame, if you will, that says it's time to do something different. And so the where we go from here for me, I believe, is let's take it from this point and move it forward because we can, because we know it has to be done. And ultimately for recidivism rates, but even more so for those who think that they really don't need to be involved in this, public safety. If you don't help people move on with their lives, I call it their self-preservation, then they're going to move on with yours. They're going to move on with yours. You're going to have to be concerned about walking outside of that grocery store. You have to be concerned at the ATM or stopped at the stop sign. We want to shift that back to where we're cohesive again, where we are a society that welcomes. And we're at the end of our time. So if there's a closing thought that you'd like to have, Ms. Saul, I appreciate your having been with me on this series. I think it's been an amazing series, and I thank you for having been a part of it. So give us a little bit of a final kind of thoughts about where do we go from this? How do we make this work?
Let's go back to loving one another and accepting each other for who we are. Start looking at the person's heart versus just how low their pants are, or where they were last week, or where you think they're going to go next week. Love them anyway. And start loving ourselves, because you can't love somebody else until you love yourself. And once we do that, then we can start coming together again as a community, the way some of us grew up, okay? And start recognizing that there's a plan here that prevents us from moving forward.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. This has just been exciting. I'm happy that you have been with me throughout this entire process. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, you have a pledge now. You should be making a pledge to go out and do something about shifting the paradigm on this crisis. You can be a part of it. And thank you so much for joining us. And as always, go out and make this a great day. Do something good for someone else.